story, and the imagination and what Jung would call symbols, inner pictures, inner messages from a deep place, begin to come into the play, which aren't around in everyday life. And Pat brought this to the Sesame course, and it's really in much the same place as it has been. It's taught in the same way and delivered in the same way and used in the same way as it has been since she brought it. So we're fortunate, and yes, we are the only people doing that thing. Jung's idea is that there is a place deep down in us, the place of dreams. He was very inspired by this idea that dreams come along to tell us in our life what we don't know in chronological time. That a dream comes along to give you a hint or a flavour of something. And Sesame borrows from that Jungian place. He explored the mythology of the world, the cultures of the world, kind of chasing the thread of this unconscious bit that's different in different cultures but belongs to all humankind. And finding out that people from all places will recognize similar themes or human growth patterns, places where a situation that I am in and I think is only me actually has happened before and after and in different places. And so it kind of normalizes that. And he had a great name for these patterns. He called them archetypes. And an archetype is a kind of inner shape or a pattern of human behavior that is recognizable to all people. And when you meet an archetype within you, when you meet this pattern within you, it affects you. One of my students once called it, an archetype is like a fizzing bundle of energy. It fizzes, it attracts you, it affects you. And the idea is that we all have ideas. For example, mother would be an archetype. And a bit like in the Laban way of working, there are two opposites. Jung was a great one on opposites. There are two opposites. Mother could be good mother, or mother could be bad mother, scary mother. And the idea is to try and not work with my experience of mother or the larger picture of mother, but can I bring that into the middle? Can I have a neutral place with mother that belongs not so much to my history and not to the world culture, but is effective and can change what my narrative has said and put me in touch with something new that's greater than my story. Now that's the therapy, and that's based very much on Jung's work.
I've heard of him, but maybe can you explain to us a little bit who Laban was?
Yes, briefly, just because there's a lot to say about Laban. He was a very inspirational figure in the late 1800s and early 1900s. He was very inspired to bring movement to and dance to community, and he was fascinated by movement, and he spent a lot of time observing people in different places, in factories and all sorts of different places, trying to understand how the body moved, really, and understand patterns of movement. And from that he created his own structure, his own sort of way of analysing movement, and he kind of did that by sort of separating it out into various components. fundamentals, and we learn about body awareness and spatial awareness, our own space and the space that we share. We look at quality of movement, that's the effort fundamental, and also added onto that is the notion of relationship, and we look at that through Veronica Sherborne's model of relationship, she was very influenced by Laban as well, and she looked at developmental movement. Weight. We're going to do strong weight and light weight. And that's also, sometimes we think of that as firm touch and fine touch. Yes, so strong weight, light weight. Strength. So we've got some lightness in the strength. Great, and allow the lightness to take over. Being drawn up to the sky. Yeah, that's lovely. Sudden. If you want to use sound, that's okay, just to help you along. Great, no gaps in the movement, it just keeps moving. So direct, in space. And flexible. Free flow, let it go, very into control. Yeah? Woo! Sometimes you're having to We're going to bring that in, down slow, bring it in, gradually. Lovely, some of you had to use bound flow quick so that you didn't bump into somebody else while you were in free flow. So we're fortunate that we can access that. Some people we work with won't be able to necessarily. Great, lovely, well done. Sherborne's model of relationship, which is there are three different kinds of relationships. We've got one here. Where are we? Is it support and depend, or is it equal? It seems equal. Okay, well, let's try that, seeing as we've got someone starting, we've got a couple starting that. So in your head, it doesn't have to be shoulder to shoulder, but you can start by doing that and then try different ways of finding equal distribution of weight and equal approach, mental, psychological approach to it. So you're kind of bringing the whole of yourself into this in an equal way. We're going to move into a support and depend. So one of you takes the weight, and you have to negotiate that a little bit through contact, how much weight you want to take. So, you know, so just make sure that you let your partner know if that's enough or you can take more. And just see if you can find your way into support and depend. Last but not least, we're going to move on to testing your strength. So here, one of you is stronger than the other, but again, what we're doing is in a contained and manageable way. Yes, and we're using the strength. And I think one way that we've done this before, which I think is quite a useful way, and can be seen quite quickly, is back to back, and one of you pushing the other along. Okay, lovely, and swap over. That's lovely, okay. And we could go on for this, I'm sure we could go on for this for a long time. And if we can get to the races, we're getting a sense of the playfulness of this and how that could be quite a reparative way of working, therapy. But unfortunately we're coming to the end, so we need to come into a circle. So perhaps you can help your partner along, back into the circle. Here at Sesame, we're looking at the basic principles that Laban devised, but we also add on the notion about relationship because we're training to work as therapists. Where Laban at Sesame maybe differs from other Laban, more traditional Laban trainings, is that on this training we're trying to integrate a more sort of Jungian slant. So we're looking at body as symbol of self, body as a symbol of ourselves, and so that's where you get the sort of the link between the physical expression and the what it might reveal as Laban thought, but also the connections with the Jungian psychology, where we're sort of looking at states and looking at typology and all those things. So they're interrelated and they're correlated. So on the training, what happens is that students are encouraged to explore their own movement experiences in the early stages of the training. They're encouraged to embody their experiences, their feelings and thoughts, and just express those very freely, sort of more along the lines of authentic movement, where there's less interruption and less editing. You just sort of follow the flow of what's going on for you. And as students become more familiar with their movement patterns and what they feel more comfortable with, and they begin to recognise how they move a little bit more, they're encouraged to then sort of look out a little bit more at others and practice finding ways of describing what they're observing, not only in themselves but in others too. And they would be encouraged to apply Laban's theory, the basic principles that I was speaking about earlier, the fundamentals, in their descriptions. And then if you were to take that a stage further, one would hope that that would be sort of thought about in terms of clinical application a bit later on in the training.
I think everybody on this course has been touched by the Laban sessions and found ways to express themselves and to experience the world in a different way. And you don't really notice you're doing it either, do you? It just kind of that's the strange thing about the sessions. They just happen. And there's this sense that, if that can happen for us, then think about what it can do for other people.
In a mental health setting, perhaps I'm thinking of a particular individual who has catatonic episodes. So this particular individual actually enjoys movements sometimes, but when in the middle of an episode they will get stuck in the middle of whatever it is that they're doing and freeze and not move, sometimes for several hours. So with somebody like that, as a therapist, you might start to think about encouraging free flow of movement, for example, when they're less stuck themselves. And perhaps, there'll be times during the therapy where there'll be moments where the individual might slow down, or just you get a sense that they might stop. And that's the point where you can really sort of work with bringing in movement qualities and free flow, and just really encourage a different experience. So hopefully that sort of gives you a bit of an idea of how movement and therapy, how using movement in therapy can be helpful. And you would use global movement analysis to kind of observe and describe what you're seeing, and it helps you think about what interventions might be helpful.
You invented movement with touch. How would you describe this as part of the Sesame practitioner's toolkit?
Well, I think all of Sesame's work is absolutely essential. But I think because people move, if they're able to, before they do anything else, and because if they're impaired in any way, the first thing that gets restricted is the movement. And they may be so restricted that they're just sitting there and not moving. And I think because movement, I know I move my hands and body all the time, because I can express myself better if I'm using my hands. But if I've got to sit like this all the time, what is happening to me? I don't really know what's happening. So when I first started movement with touch was when I went into a hospital, up in this area actually, and we were introduced, I was training students at some of these hospitals. Anyway, those were the people. These, the ones we were going to work with, were lying on bean bags, so you couldn't see any of their faces. And so we had to lift up the heads of the people and say, well, is this one of the people we're working with? No, right back on the beanbag, and then the next one. And so how can you work with people? You can't do myths and legends. You can't do movement, but you can do movement, because you can move their bodies for them. So what we used to do, and I've got a photograph, not a very good one, very often we would have them lying down. These started in wheelchairs because they couldn't, Eventually we had them lying down, and then we could move their limbs for them. And I remember one young man in a different ward, because the whole subject is the same, who had what's called an acute lordosis. His whole, this part of his body, his chest was twisted sideways, and he was always like this. This was his position.